Hi, Karen. Welcome back. Hmm. Beautiful. So we're at our time, and as usual, we're just waiting another minute or two. Hi, Michelle. Hmm. Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome. Good day, good afternoon, good evening. All right, so we are back for week 2 of this fall 2022 course called Transmission of the Light, looking at Keizan Zenji's Denkoroku, the awakening stories of Soto Zen teachers, Soto Zen masters. And before I get into the recap for today, I just want to make an announcement, which is that the Vihara is going to be closed all next week. I'm going to be out of town visiting some family. So there won't be any public programs, and there also won't be any Thursday night class. So just so that you know, which I think most of you know already, but we're skipping a week. And I have not gotten the talks up yet. So that means that you have to bear with me. They might not be up by next Saturday. It might be more like Sunday or Monday before I get those talks posted to the class page. But definitely, at least if you'll have at least a few days to have a look there before our class. And hello to Ashley's kitty too. Beautiful. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and just say a few words about our books that we are studying this week. And so the 3 ancestors that we're looking at this week are Kapimala, Nagarjuna, and Kanadeva. And so Kapimala is probably best known as Nagarjuna's teacher, really, but we'll look at that story. So just looking at the Cleary translation here, it begins with Ashvaghosha, so Kapimala's teacher, making a statement about Buddha nature. The mountains, rivers, and earth are all established on it. All insights and mental powers appear from here. So right away, we see that one of the themes of this particular story is something like, don't think that you're doing it all with your intention, by your individual striving. That to really know Buddha nature is to know something far beyond one's personal intention. And then there is more of the origin story or the backstory here. And so there is this, again, this kind of magical transformation that's happening here in various ways. An old man, a girl, a bug. I find it interesting that Kapimala is referred to as a demon in this particular story, right? That he is the demon who has come to have a contest of power with Ashvaghosha. So it's very, very interesting framing. And of course, it turns out that Ashvaghosha's powers are much stronger than Kapimala's. And his powers are encouraging him to take refuge. That's the source of his power, right? That's how he ultimately deals with him, by encouraging him to take refuge in the triple treasure of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So it's a beautiful turning, right, of what we mean really by spiritual power, what we mean by the strength of someone's practice. And it also harkens back to various teachings much, much earlier than this, in which taking refuge is really held up as a very strong practice, stronger, more powerful than many other practices that we still do. But knowing that taking refuge has a very transformative effect. And so again, this is a study in the nature of intention, because refuge is about turning one's intention to the path, right? To the Buddha as representing awakening itself, or perhaps the highest human capacity, or some historical being who brought us these teachings, to the Dhamma as a true representation of reality, as a pointer toward that reality, and as a way of beginning to immerse ourselves in that, and the Sangha as the community. How else would we know the Dhamma if not through our contact with other people? How else would we know? So there goes. Then Kapimala, the Ashvaghosha asks him, how is it when you use your magical power? So this play on power and strength and intention continues when Kapimala responds, to produce an ocean is a very small thing for me. I totally got a chuckle out of that. I go, just a little arrogance there. Just a little attitude. So then Ashvaghosha asks him about the ocean of essential nature, or the ocean of Buddha nature, or the ocean of reality. What about the ocean of reality? Tell me more about that, right? Not just some illusion, not just some magical play, but tell me about the ocean of reality. So it goes on, and we see at the bottom of page 50 of the Kaliri, there's a mention of the Shurangama Sutra, the Heroic March Sutra, and various spiritual powers that are said to manifest due to strong states of concentration. And nothing unusual there. And then this line at the top of 51, which I really enjoyed, not a single thing, not a single phenomenon has ever come from outside of reality. And why is it necessary to tell us that? Why is it useful to tell us that? Well, because what it is implying is that also we don't need to find our way outside. this very life is sufficient to find our way to the understanding of reality, to the lived experience of the nature of reality. So anyway, I don't want to go into too much more detail there. We can talk more about that if you would like. But there is this statement about emptiness at the top of 52. Do not think that emptiness has no form or that emptiness has no sound. It cannot be considered void and it cannot be considered existent either. So this is, again, this is looking at emptiness from the perspective of the lack of permanence of a thing, which implies its conditionality, its interdependence, its natural tendency toward transformation. That's the way that emptiness is being described here. And I think that I shared with you this, one of my favorite quotes from Dogen, which is, "The sound that issues from the striking of emptiness is an endless and wondrous voice." The sound that issues from the striking of emptiness is an endless and wondrous voice. And so we might ask ourselves, what is it that is striking emptiness? But I'm going to leave that as an open koan for you tonight. And we're going to move on to Nagarjuna right now. So Nagarjuna, a towering figure in Buddhism, right? Ostensibly somewhere around late 2nd century, plus or minus 100 years or so. And really a teacher whose ability to really penetrate, how can we say this? Offer the teachings in a very pithy and logical way was really renowned. That's what he became known for. And there's this question about the jewel. So Nagarjuna is asked, or Nagarjuna asked the question of Kapimala, does it have form or is it formless? So we're still in the realm of, again, as you see, there's a lovely thread, right? That we went from the formlessness or the form and formlessness, or neither form nor formlessness of emptiness, right? The interdependence there, the play on it. And Nagarjuna is asking Kapimala about that. So this is the ultimate jewel, the one that he's received from the Naga King. But Kapimala responds by saying, only knowing form or not form is missing part of the story, right? That sense of the two sides of the coin fails to understand the reality of it, just as we see in many other strands of Buddhism, right? This not falling to the side of existence or to the side of non-existence, but this understanding of all reality as mere temporal phenomena in a constant state of interdependent arising and ceasing. So much so that you cannot pin it down. That's the point. You don't pin it down to one side or the other. So that's the not, the only knowing form or not is missing something. So the neither form nor formless, that's what he's referring to when Kapimala talks about that, this interdependent nature of temporal phenomena. And you do not yet know that this jewel is not a jewel. So what? So it's not precious. It's not more precious than the teachings that will help us to awaken to the true nature of reality. That is the most precious thing, right? A jewel is just a rock in that case. It's not really going to help you forward on the path. In fact, that is one of the key teachings, right? That's why we go beyond greed. We go beyond the desire for jewels, because we know that all those things are leaving us in life or in death. no matter how valuable that jewel is. But awakening is something that isn't leaving you. So in any event, Kapimala goes on. They have an encounter with a big snake. There's a lot of, again, the magical. The Nagas are known to live in the upper realms. They are up there with the Devas and the Brahmas and the formless beings. The Nagas are very special beings. In the so-called celestial realms, they're also known for being in the, like dragons in the water dragons, like the Loch Ness monster. It could be a Naga. And they held texts, old Buddhist texts down there that they eventually released. That's another story of the Nagas. So anyhow, there's this sad story of the monk that used to get mad when people came and asked him for a teaching, and then ended up with the karma of that, some difficult karma of that, of becoming an animal. And then eventually he comes back to being a person. And then we have this encounter with Nagarjuna and Kapimala, where Kapimala says, in a display of incredible humility, right? This very powerful, renowned teacher says, I'm not the supremely honorable one. I've come to visit you. And Nagarjuna thought to himself, ooh, is this a special person? Is this someone who is enlightened? And Kapimala responds by saying, even though you're speaking in your heart, I already know it in my mind. So we don't know whether this means, whether he is saying this literally, that he's able to read his mind. That would be not unusual to see that in a text like this. Or whether he's saying, I understand what's happening for you in this moment, right? We're having a moment of where you're wondering about who I am, what I represent, why am I here? So very prosaically, you could say, he might say something like that. And he just says, what? Just take care of renunciation of worldly ties. So just put yourself entirely on the path and don't worry about whether I'm a sage or not. So this is a beautiful example of skillfulness in the teacher, right? So what is he doing? He's expressing confidence in Nagarjuna's ability to put himself wholeheartedly on the path and walk it and do it and be it. So I might be wise, I might be enlightened, I might not be, but ultimately what's more important is your engagement with your life. That's the first teaching he gives him. So anyhow, we continue on. There's this statement that Nagarjuna abandoned all the other schools that he had learned about, and I think that's kind of a sad kind of sectarianism that we see Keizan Zenji express here and there in the book. So I would say more like he integrated everything that came into his practice, and then he became who he became. He became Nagarjuna, a person who actually was known for the Middle Way school, an entirely new angle on Buddhism. So we continue on, and there is this part about this, and then we have Kanadeva. Kanadeva and the bowl. One other thing I want to say before we finish up with Nagarjuna. So there's this talk about not living alone, which we've seen before. And then there's this part at the top of 57, which is a little difficult because we see, again, Keizan Zenji falling a little bit into one side or the other. So if people practice only to train themselves, meaning without an altruistic ideal behind it, then they will become spoiled seed. And spoiled seed means they are scorched seed in that they cut off the seed of Buddhahood. And I just want to say, hey, you cannot cut off the seed of Buddha nature. You might be behaving in your life in such a way that you won't really realize the fullness of the path because of your stinginess. That's one thing. But to say that one seed of Buddha nature would become scorched in some way or damaged in some way, that is incompatible with the whole idea behind Buddha nature. So it's a little bit of an error on Keizan's part. Scorched seed, there's no such thing as scorched seed, in my opinion. You can only fail to establish the conditions for the seed to grow. That might be what happens in this lifetime. Okay, I see that. I could see where that would happen because of the lack of compassion, the lack of altruism, the lack of generosity of one's practice. And then again, just the next paragraph, he goes down and says, even if you have attained the way, you should cultivate and refine it in community. So be careful. Be careful. You don't refine the way. You don't refine the way. You cultivate the way by discovering the way, but you do not ever refine the way. The way is already perfect. So then we move on to Kanadeva, and Kanadeva is again a great story. It's often to me interesting to see how the student of the great master is the one in this particular set of stories that has this incredibly penetrative and intuitive entry. So Kanadeva is arriving. Nagarjuna knows. He has somebody put a bowl of water in front of him. And what happens with the bowl of water? Well, he slips a little needle into it, right? He slips the needle into it. What a fabulous demonstration. So the bowl of water is full. It represents Buddha nature, the completeness, the fullness of absolute awakening present in all things. There's no room for anything. There's no space anywhere. It's all completely pervaded. That's the full bowl. And yet, chink, right? We can penetrate it. We can enter into that. Right in the midst of it. There we are. The needle, getting all the way to the bottom of it. It's a beautiful, beautiful demonstration, right? Just boom, without a word, without a single word. He showed that he understood. So that's Kanadeva. There's this fabulous story about the full moon. Nagarjuna expounded the teaching by manifesting the form of the full moon. Some people take this to mean literally like his aura got so bright that it was just a big white thing and you couldn't see him anymore. And there's actually a painting that shows him like that. And other people say, no, it's the sort of classical example of the moon representing wisdom. So Nagarjuna represented the full moon, meaning he taught a complete addition of wisdom in that moment. He showed the fullness and the brightness of wisdom. Dogen was very cranky about somebody painting it as the aura. He really didn't like that. So we see this verse we see this verse which Nagarjuna spoke, and which becomes the symbol of what Kanadeva was pointing out, right? The teaching has no shape, and thereby we discern it. Right? Just like the water fits the shape of the bowl. So there we see Kazan tell us again, there was a full bowl, therefore there is no lack. Absolutely clear and pure throughout. That's how we know that it stands for the Buddha nature. And Kazan again using these metaphors. So at the bottom of 60, it's like penetrating through the spiritual namana and seeking the spiritual sword. So the sword is like the needle penetrating the bowl, right? And so at the top of 61, you see this line, are this needle and water anything else but your body and mind? Your body and mind, folks. And the people who Kazan is speaking to. And don't think that it means needle is body and water is mind, okay? That's not what it means. The needle is the body and mind, the water is the body and mind. Furthermore, he says at that second to last paragraph, even if you've gotten to know the clear water, you should feel it carefully and realize there is a needle in it. So this means don't get hung up on your awakening. Don't get caught by your awakening. So sorry, that was a little bit of a longer recap this time. And still have, I think, plenty of time for questions and some small group after that. So let's see what folks want to talk about. Yes, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a comment, just something that I thought when I was reading about Kanadeva and Nagarjuna meeting Kanadeva. These people, it was so long ago and such, outside of the realm of my normal world, I guess, that they seem a little I don't want to say not human, but that they're just so different. But this idea that that Nagarjuna saw something in Kanadeva seems really human and something that every day we have the possibility of seeing someone that we know, maybe not by experience, but that we understand where their heart is or where their intentions are or something like that. And that was just really nice. It brought sort of a current reality to these people for me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yes, I totally agree, Michelle. I think that that it is absolutely possible for us to have these kinds of encounters with people, very clear encounters where we see something beyond the superficial in someone, in each other.
I had a question. I think it's a question.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's a question.
Okay.
I think there's a question.
Comments are okay too.
I don't know what the question is.
Okay.
So one of the themes that I see in these three stories, less so in Nagarjuna, definitely very clear in both Kanadeva and Kapimala is the idea of the distinction, false distinction between inside and outside.
Mm,
You know, the theme of completeness, the theme of wholeness.
mhm,
And it is, I think for me personally, I find that to be a very important aspect of practice, is to look at the falseness of the distinction between inside and outside.
mhm,
And they are, you know, using these metaphors to talk about that, that are very, you know, like jewels or moons or, you know, the vastness of water. And I just wonder, I guess the question is really about like, these are lovely images, but how do we make it real for us? Like, how do we bring this to
Mm.
very concrete practice
mhm,
to work with the unity and non-separateness of phenomena? Does that make sense?
mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, it's a really very important, and I would say kind of overarching question for us, the whole issue of how are we really experiencing interdependence and non-separation, right? Even to talk about it as non-separation is like, well, okay, what is that, right? Because our tendency is to talk about two. Thanks for reaching out, right? We use all of this language constantly, or we're connecting. We already were connected. Guess what? We already were connected, right? So it's funny, it's a funny thing how we have built in this sense of separation into our language, into the way we move around the world. And yet, you know, what comes up for me, Ashley, when you ask the question or when you make the comment, is something about like going back to that initial story of the Buddha and thinking about like we are built as beings that are completely, you could say, like informed by all of our contacts, all of the things that are happening, right? In terms of every single sense door, including the mind sense door, every time there's something happening there, we are literally like built that way, that we are not separate from what we're experiencing, right? The thing that you think is you is really actually like the eyeball and the nerves firing and the thought that gets sparked and all of that, which was actually what? Literally, physically, in the material world, connected to that star from 5 billion years ago, or however many billion years ago it was, right? So in a sense, I feel like when we get down into this very, very intimate, this is why I love the thing about the body that's coming up in the verse from Nagarjuna to Kanadeva, right? When we get into a very, very clear knowing of bodily experience, and the five aggregates, that is, it's just like, it's kind of in your face at that point, the non-separation. It's like you can't really buy that story anymore, right? But I think that it requires some vulnerability. It requires us having the door to be open to that, right? Because the reason why we want to acknowledge this sense of separation or create this sense of separation is a defense, right? It's very much like creating a space of safety and some sense of safety. So maybe it's related to that too, you know, like some deep vulnerability that's possible. Also kind of connecting to what Michelle was saying about how those encounters can be superficial.
Right. I,
Well, I mean, how do you practice with the five aggregates? If you study the five aggregates, like if you see the Vedana or you see the star at night, do you think about this kind of thing? Does that help? Let me put it that way. Or is it still conceptual?
oh, no, I totally have worked with that. I think, I mean, the point about vulnerability is really important, right? Because
Mm,
if you lose the self-referential standpoint, right? Like if you lose that containing everything as a self, then you have to be open to the reality of all your experience being conditional on the things that are not within your control, which is terrifying if, because we're conditioned to think that we have to constantly maintain and manipulate a state of equilibrium and contentment and happiness and safety and all the things, all the positive sides of the 8 winds. So like, in order to do that, we're constantly in this self-referential judgment phase. And to be willing to drop that is truly like willingness to go outside the scope of safety.
yes.
Like it's a very, without confidence that the universe actually has a fundamental well-being, there is a concern that if you're not looking after your self-referential viewpoint, then who will? What's going to happen? So like there's a certain amount of confidence that has to exist to drop a self-referential viewpoint.
Yes. Yes.
So,
And I think that a lot of times some of the reasons why we see the stages of insight or the progress on the path that include stories about terror, right? And include stories about a lot of like difficult encounters, or Hakuin talking about feeling like his whole body and mind became a block of ice for a long period of time. We don't know how long he was saying, until he shattered it somehow, right? Like those kinds of things are that kind of in-between stage, right? Where there's this knowing the need for that confidence and that vulnerability and that opening to it in such a way that you give up this sense of looking for personal safety. And yet you don't know, you haven't really seen it to the degree that you could feel the confidence in that, right? You could feel like able to give yourself over to that. So there's this also oftentimes this kind of in-between, very, very difficult stage for people that comes out of that. But it reminds me also, Ashley, when you're saying about Ahimsa used to tell a story about a French woman that she knew up in Canada who had some kind of very, very profound awakening, if not full awakening. And she was asked to come to somebody's Sangha. I don't want to say whose Sangha because I'll probably get it wrong. But anyway, she was asked to come and say something about what she experienced. And her whole talk was, don't try to survive. That was the theme of her talk. Like, there is no surviving. Would you just get over that? And when you get over that, that will help you a whole lot because of this very same dynamic. Right? That's where the Buddha started, right? Sickness, old age, and death. There is no surviving. So really, really, how do we live well knowing that?
that's the question.
Okay, no fair, because I said it first, so you have to answer it, not me.
I mean, if you have tips, right? Like,
yeah. Okay, maybe one more comment or question, and then we're going to go to small groups for a bit. Yes, Margaret, please.
I was wondering in the Kapimala chapter, how
Mhm.
much is Kapimala, and how much is our Zen chronicler, particularly when we got to the end And he's talking about not thinking that emptiness has no form or that emptiness has no sound. And I'm hearing the Heart Sutra coming through on this,
Mhm.
and wondering all of a sudden, when did it come into existence? And how much is Kazan introducing that?
Mm. Mm.
And how much of it is it really Kapimala? And does it matter? But I'm curious.
Well, it's a good point. If I understand what you're saying there, Margaret, which is perhaps something about Kazan using these stories as ways of introducing Buddhist teachings, right? As ways of sort of giving the fundamentals to his students in the context of people's life stories, right? Like Kapimala and so on. I can imagine that that would be, part of the reason maybe why he even wanted to tell the stories.
Well, I think of Nagarjuna with emptiness and the emptiness of emptiness, but he's focusing it much more with Kapimala. And maybe that's because that's where it started, much more so than with Nagarjuna. And I just don't know any better.
Well, I think for me, when the thread that I drew, and might not be there for you, but when I see Ashvaghosha say, all things are established on it, all things appear from here, that is talking about, that's a reference to, or that becomes perhaps like the Zen way of understanding emptiness as also like creative capacity, right? Emptiness is all things we see later on teachings, like all things are arising out of emptiness. And that is unfortunate use of language, because then that later becomes where emptiness starts to become understood as like some essential, like the field. Exactly. And I know you know that that's not how it was intended here, but I think that that's what he's drawing on. And maybe that's what that is more to do with Ashvaghosha even than Kapimala necessarily, because I agree that we don't see much of Kapimala's teaching here, except for his producing an ocean thing.
Right.
Yeah. But there is all throughout here. And, I think that Cynthia wasn't able to join us tonight because she had a family thing crop up, but I haven't been sort of stopping at all of the references in here. We see there is constant stream, actually, Margaret, just as you're saying, of like references to koans, references to other sutras, references to the heart. I definitely agree with you. I think that that's a good, I hadn't noticed it until just now, but I think you're absolutely right that is a Heart Sutra style teaching that he's giving right there. Sort of tying it back.
I love emptiness has no sound. I absolutely love that. Has no form, yes, but has no sound. Oh, wow.
Well, he says, don't think that, though. He says, therefore, you should not think that emptiness has no form or that emptiness has no sound.
Has no sound. And
don't think that.
Right. Right. It's wonderful.
It is wonderful. It is wonderful because it's something about, I mean, for me, actually, it's also beautiful because I think that it helps me to relate to, I usually think of like karma depends on impermanence, right? Without impermanence, we can't have karma doing what karma does. But at the same time, you could also say similarly about emptiness, right? This interdependence, if it weren't for the interconnection, then if we did something intentional, it wouldn't have that effect and that effect and that effect and that effect that goes on and carries on like that, right? So I really see how it's coming together there with the three marks in a way. Nicely done, Margaret. Mm. Okay, so I think it's time for the small groups. And the one thing that I wanted to check on was about your question for the day. Oh, yes. How do relationships inform your practice? Oh, how do relationships inform your practice? What does that have to do with what we're looking at here? And bringing it down again to real life. What does this have to do with it? So I'm going to go ahead and set you all up for let's see. So we have a small group today. How do we threes or fours? People like to do fours or threes because then you have a little bit more time to talk to each other. Nobody? Threes? We got threes. Okay, one vote for threes, it goes. So we'll have 3 groups of 3. Unless again, everybody, you always have the option to just opt out and not join your group if that's what you want to do. And the prompt question again is, how do relationships inform your practice? And if you choose to talk about something else, well, then nobody but you guys will know. And you'll have roughly 15 to
I think she's frozen.
Yeah.
There's karma for you.
Margaret, looks like you've been promoted. It came as you are the host.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, folks. My
Oh,
internet
good.
a little bit off and on this today, so I apologize. Let me try one more time here. It wasn't a breakout room thing. It was a Xfinity thing. So, okay, I'm going to try again to send you all into breakout groups. Okay, off you go. How are you doing with the heat there? Should I turn it off? Is it too warm? No, it's okay.
You have some meals outside. Should I bring it inside? Yeah, because it's very windy.
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay. All right, wonderful. Welcome back. And so thank you, Dave. We have about 10 minutes or so to do some last bit of sharing or anything that you would like to talk about. Beth, are you unmuted because you want to say something?
No.
Okay. Sorry, didn't mean to cold call you there. All right. Anybody want to share? How did it go in the group? Charles Lee.
Yeah, I can share something, and thanks for letting me join the class. Class
course.
late. I'm Charles Lee. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So hi everybody, and yeah, we just talked about I guess practice with close family members, which I've heard has been described as graduate school, or what is the quote? If you think you're enlightened, just go home to your family and check. And
Test it out.
Probably not. So yeah, so just the difficulties in practicing relationship. And I see, there are these famous, Dharma couples. And I was remarking in a different session with a different group that I see that, and I find myself saying, I want that. If only my wife was practicing Buddhism, then things would be so much better. And so that's a practice edge for me, is to how do I practice without necessarily getting the reflection that I want.
Well, just that observation, right? Not getting the reflection that you want. That's a very interesting observation, reflection right there. So I just want to say, of course, happy to have you, Charles Lee, in the class. So yeah, warm welcome. And there are some people I know here who are in a relationship where there are two people practicing. So we don't know if they want to say anything, but
It does mean that I have something. Gareth and I are married. There's no one else that I can have these conversations with, and it is really wonderful to do that. But couples still get on each other's nerves, even if they are great practitioners. And I think maybe it gives you a kind of language that you have in common that you can talk about. And you can also call each other on your shit and hopefully not resent them for it. But I'm very happy, and it reinforces. If I don't sit in the morning, my husband will notice, and he'll ask me, "Oh, you didn't sit this morning?" And so. It's kind of having another conscious keeping me honest, so yeah.
Nice. Thanks for sharing, Beth. Yeah, or you could live in a monastery where also people notice if you don't sit in the morning. Or you have other people that you're practicing with, and you would have these conversations, and you would also know, like, oh gosh, something happened today. Didn't go smoothly. Right. Anything else about relationships before we wrap up this evening, or about the content? Yes, Beth, please.
I shared with the group something that's going on right now, which is I'm caretaker for my father. He's 91. He's in assisted living, but I'm there, every day helping him out and everything. And in the group, I was relating how most of my adult life, I had a very difficult relationship with my father, and there was a lot of bitterness, and I was holding a lot of grudges and a lot of anger. And seeing and interacting with him as a very old man, I realized this is not the same person. And there's no reason to hold on to those grudges. Instead, what in front of me is just someone who is suffering, and needs care and compassion. And we had a good discussion about those kind of stories that you keep telling yourself, that keeps igniting those things, and the reality just isn't there anymore. And it helps you to release those stories.
Beautiful. That sounds, yeah. Very important. Learning that person isn't the same person. You aren't the same person. Yeah. And you can hold on to that flaming ball of charcoal for a long time, or not. Right? Or not. Sometimes it's hard to let it go. Yeah. But again, this maybe the thread of the vulnerability also, right? You see his vulnerability now in a different way. And then you allowed your own vulnerability to that. Yeah. Anybody else want to share a little bit about something relationship related, or something that you read? Looks like we're good for tonight. Yeah. All right. Beautiful. Well, next week I promise a shorter recap. And it's not next week, because next week we're off, and then so it's the following week. And we actually have 4 books that we're looking at the following week. So I will have to work hard to make it a shorter recap, but I will. And again, just looking for those. Those recordings aren't going to happen until a week from now. But in the meantime, you have some other materials. I actually added one more article for that week that we come back from the holiday break. About Prajnatara as a woman, about the history, a little bit of somebody digging into the history of that. Rajnatara was understood in the Japanese lineage always to be a patriarch, but actually she is a matriarch according to the Korean lineages and many of the other schools, and even into the Indian records, back to the Indian records. So you can have a look at that if that's of interest. And please, everybody, have a wonderful, wonderful holiday. Dealing with your family and maybe enjoying that and enjoying some time together with friends or time off, whatever works. And yes, dedicating the merits of our practice this evening to the awakening of all beings, known and unknown, seen and unseen. Good night. Be well.
Good night.
Good night. Take care.